process off. So right now we'll just take a look at the overall online application process step by step. So step one is that you're going to set up your online account with NNAS at www.nnas.ca, and you are going to download the applicant handbook. The applicant handbook's incredibly important because it's going to give you the details you need to know to actually complete the process through this journey. Step two, you're going to create your profile on the NNAS website. You'll be entering your biographic information and your contact information, and that's going to be the basis for your online account. Step three, once you've completed the online application, the final section is going to ask you to make a payment, and that will automatically submit the online portion of your application. So once the application is submitted, it's going to give you access to a certain set of forms that were generated as a result of the answers that you populated throughout your application. There are three main forms that you're going to be printing out. The first is the education form, the employment form, and the nursing jurisdiction registration form. The forms that you're going to have the primary sources, that is your nursing school, the licensing authority, or any former practice employer, complete and send directly to NNAS. So once you've completed your file, NNAS is going to do a few things. We're going to evaluate the documents that we've received to determine whether or not they meet the requirements for NNAS. If there's anything deficient, you'll be notified along the way. And then we conduct, as Gail mentioned briefly, the curricular analysis. So essentially, we're going to read through the syllabus provided by your nursing program, and we're going to be comparing it against the entry to practice competencies for the nursing profession that you're applying for. And then a copy of the report, one is released for you, and one is sent directly to the regulatory body to which you wish to apply. And the final process is, once your advisory report's available, you'll be given access to apply directly to the regulatory body. And then from that point forward, you'll be officially an applicant of that regulatory body to follow their procedures towards licensure. So what we're looking at now is that portion of the online account where you'll be providing us with your biographic personal details. So at this point, you've chosen to register and set up an account. You'll be sent an email with a security code that will allow you to securely access your own online account. And then we're going to ask you for some details, such as your full name, as it appears most likely on your current identification. And we'll also ask you for your address, your contact information to set up the biographic portion of your account. We'll also ask you for certain information about your primary language at this point. So once you've set up your biographic information, you'll be then able to start a new application. This is the first step in beginning the online portion of the application. So you'll select Begin a New Application. And then it's going to ask you for the type of nursing group you wish to apply for, whether that's a licensed/registered practical nurse, registered nurse, or registered psychiatric nurse. Once you've selected the nursing group that you wish to apply for, you will then be able to select the province in which you wish to apply for that group. So once you've selected the nursing group and the province you wish to apply to, it's going to highlight the mandatory components of your application. Now, that's not to say that the other sections A through E are not important, but these are sections that are required in order for you to be eligible to apply through NNAS. So Part A is going to be the first, and that's going to ask you for your nursing education history. So you'll begin here in Part A by adding your nursing schools. So some of you may have completed one nursing program, some of you may have completed several nursing programs. What we're looking for is we're looking for your initial nursing program and any higher education nursing programs you may have completed on top of that. And you're going to enter the country in which that program was completed. Okay, Part B is going to ask about nursing registration. NNAS collects information on any nursing registration you have ever held, regardless of its current validity. This is very important because neglecting to add a nursing license at this stage could cause delays later in the process. So the first, it's going to ask you a question about registration. So it's going to ask, did you obtain registration in the jurisdiction where you completed your initial nursing program? It's a yes or no question. It's also going to ask you if the jurisdiction or country of your initial nursing program does not issue a license, does your diploma allow you the right to practice in that jurisdiction? There are certain countries where one is able to practice by virtue of having completed their nursing education and obtained the nursing diploma. There are very specific countries in which this takes place, which is why we ask these questions up front. Once you've entered the answers to those questions, you can continue. And it's going to allow you to add a current nursing registration. So it'll begin by asking you for your current nursing registration that may be currently valid, but it's also going to give you the option after that to add any other nursing registration that you've ever held. Again, it's incredibly important that regardless of where you were licensed, that you list it in this section. So if you were educated in one country but practiced in another and obtained registration in that other country, you want to list that registration as well. So in this Part C examinations, this is where you'll be able to add information on any exams you may have passed. Perhaps you passed a licensing examination in another country that you'd like to add. Some nurses applying through NNAS have passed the NCLEX examination in the past in another country. Some have completed prometric examinations for licensure. Some have completed licensing examinations in their home country as well. And this is the section where you'll add those. Part D is a section titled Conditions. These are certain required questions for you to complete that were put in place by the harmonized request of the regulatory bodies in Canada. And then this is just a continuation of the type of questions that you'll be required to say yes or no to. And then finally, you'll reach Part E, which is employment. NNAS collects nursing practice employment that you've conducted over the last 5 years. So here's where you'll add the details of your employment. And any employment added that was conducted in the last 5 years will generate a form that'll be a required field. So once you've completed Part E, your application will give you access to Part F. This is the payment portion of the application. Once you've completed the payment, as I stated earlier, it'll electronically submit the online portion of your application. Now, that's not to say that you can't go back and add requirements after the application's been submitted, but this portion, after making payment, is what transmits it electronically into the NNAS system. And then once you've made payment, it'll give you access to Part G. Part G is the form section. This is where the electronic forms are generated based on the information you've provided in Part A, education, Part B, registration, and Part E, employment. On the forms page, it also has a series of videos that give you a little bit more insight into some of the information we're going to be asking the primary source for, such as the example we see here, is program curriculum. This is a tutorial video that explains why we request the curriculum and why it's such an important part of the NNAS process. Now below this, when we scroll on to the next slide, this is the bottom of that screen. So we'll have another tutorial video where we highlight proper notarization of the identity document requirement, which is something that you as the applicant can submit. And then below that are the hyperlinks to each of the forms that are being generated as a result of the data you entered in your application. So if you entered the nursing education, you'll click on the hyperlink to access that form. And likewise for any registration you've listed or any employment practice you've listed on your application. Now, one thing I want to point out. So if you were to add multiple nursing programs, it's still only going to give you one hyperlink, but when you click on that link, there's going to be a long PDF where the first section will be the first school that you added, and it'll continue right into another form for the second school you added. It's very important that you separate these and send them to the proper primary source. The bottom page of each form is going to identify this specific primary source that it's designated for to help you keep those forms in order, because they're going to print out as one PDF and you'll have to manually separate them. Same goes for registration and employment. So next we're going to take a look at the forms. We're going to look at the registration form first, followed by the nursing practice employment form, and then finally the nursing education form. So what we're looking at here are the first two pages of the nursing registration form. Part A of each of the forms that you're going to be printing out is going to be pre-populated with some of the information that you've listed in your online application, such as your biographic information, and it's going to auto-populate the primary source that you indicated in your application. So below your name and mailing address is going to provide the name of the nursing jurisdiction or licensing authority, and this will be taken directly from what you entered on your application. And then you'll also sign in Part A, because that's authorizing that primary source to release your information contained in this form to NNAS. Now, there is a series of specific information contained on every form. This information that we're requesting is part of the harmonized data that the regulatory bodies in Canada have determined that they require in order to process an application for licensure. So the very first thing we also ask for at the Part B of every form is the name of the registrant. So this was your name at the time you were licensed. So this becomes very important across all three forms, because NNAS is required to collect an identity document that verifies every variation of your name that appears on any of the official documentation we collect. So that's something you want to keep in mind while you're beginning this process. If you went by a different name when you were licensed, you want to make sure that NNAS receives an identity document that verifies that particular name. Some of the acceptable identity documents that we can collect are passport, driver's license, permanent residence cards. Some of the documents we collect for name verification purposes: marriage certificate, birth certificate. Now, if you don't have an identity document that verifies these names, you want to consider getting an official affidavit. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So now we'll proceed. So each of these questions was specifically designed at the behest of the regulatory bodies in Canada to capture the information that they need to process the application. And it's very important when the primary sources are completing these forms that they do not leave information blank. If something doesn't apply, they can indicate that this is not applicable for their jurisdiction, but any question left unanswered or blank would constitute a discrepancy on the form that would most likely result in an email to you indicating that we need to collect that information. So on Part C of the registration form, this is the identification of the official. This is the most likely, for licensing authorities, the registrar who's filling out that form. Now, this is something that becomes critically important, because Part C is how we authenticate the form itself. We maintain a database of worldwide licensing authorities. They're recognized officials who are authorized to sign forms, copies of their signatures, institution seals. So when your form comes in, the first thing we're going to look at for primary source purposes is the envelope. Did this come directly from the licensing authority? The second thing we're going to look at to authenticate the form is it signed by the recognized official that we have on file from that jurisdiction? Now, with any database, we try to keep our information most up to date. However, if we receive a document that's signed by an official that we don't currently have in our database, we often reach directly back out to that primary source to obtain that official's signature and title. Now we're going to move on to, I believe, the employment form. The nursing practice employment form. Again, Part A will pre-populate with certain information pulled from your application. You'll be required to sign and date Part A, giving the employer authorization to release the contents of the form to NNAS. And as in all forms, there is a set of data questions that are asked as part of the harmonized requirements established by the Canadian regulatory bodies. So what this is going to do, the employment form is part of the requirements set up to collect information on safe practice. So what we do is we collect information on any practice or employment, nursing practice or employment, I should specify, completed within the last 5 years, as well as certain information about the name of the practice setting, the characteristics of the patient population, the dates of employment, and also the number of employment practice hours conducted in each of those last 5 years. So our current forms are up to date for 2019. So year one would correspond to 2019. And then year 5 would correspond to 2015. And we're going to be collecting the number of hours from the employer that you practice in each of those years, if applicable. Now, another thing the employment form does is it gives us a bigger picture of your history of nursing. So one thing we do is we cross-reference employment in a jurisdiction with license or registration that you've listed on your application, which is why I said it's very important for you to list right off the bat any license you've ever held, regardless of its current validity. Because many times what prolongs this process is we receive a nursing employment form where it indicates that you practice in a certain jurisdiction, but it does not correspond with any license you've listed on your application, which prompts us to reach out to you to question whether or not you were licensed in a jurisdiction and require that you add that to your application, print out the form that's generated as a result of that, and once again send that out to this primary source to complete and return to NNAS. So really what you're doing when you're filling out your application is putting together a puzzle of your history as a nurse that we'll then take the pieces and put together to paint the overall picture of your nursing history. So again, before I proceed to the education form, just to confirm, all of the forms that are generated must be sent directly from the primary source that completed them. In this case, the employer would have to send it directly to us. It's incredibly important that you request that the employer send it in an envelope that clearly identifies them as the sender, whether or not it's on their letterhead or bears their stamp or is return addressed from the official at the official address of that employer who completed the form. And now we'll move on to the nursing education form. So again, as in the registration and employment forms, Part A is going to pre-populate with biographic information and data pulled from your application. It's going to require your signature to release this, to authorize the school to release your information to NNAS. And then it's going to proceed with Part B, which give us the details of your nursing education, the name that you used when attending that nursing education, the type of program, the type of institution, whether it was at a secondary, a vocational, a college, a hospital, or a university level. We're going to ask for the minimum entrance requirements for admission into that nursing program. All of this information is specifically designed to give us the details that we need to accurately assess your credential. We're also going to ask for the language of theory instruction of the institution, clinical instruction, and the primary language of that institution. And then we'll ask the school to indicate what type of degree was obtained and the category of program. Was this a nursing program? Was this a practical nursing program, a psychiatric nursing program, or possibly something else that's not represented in those choices? And the length of study. We're also going to ask, how is the program delivered? Was it in a classroom setting? Was it an online or distance learning, or was it a blend of both? If it was other, we ask that they describe that. It's very important when they're selecting other that they provide an explanation, because that could constitute missing information if they do not. We're also going to ask for the name of the organization that officially recognized, approved, or accredited that nursing program, the date it was originally approved, and the date that it last renewed its accreditation. Now, below that, it's going to give you a paragraph that many people tend to skip over. However, this is probably one of the most important pieces of information on the form. This is going to describe that NNAS performs a document-based assessment of the student's credentials to Canadian nursing education and competency standards. The quality and completeness of the documents received, i.e. the length of the document, the in-depth nature of the document, and the breadth of the document by NNAS, along with this nursing education form, greatly influences the degree of comparability. Once an applicant's education assessment is complete and an advisory report is issued, NNAS is not able to consider any additional curriculum-related materials unless the applicant reapplies and pays the associated fees. Now, we say that because there's two documents that we're requesting the school to send us in addition to this completed form. We're asking for a copy of your final academic transcript, as well as a detailed course syllabus. So if you completed, say, we'll use a 4-year BSN as an example, we're asking the school to provide us with the detailed syllabus of all 4 years of nursing education. As you can imagine, this document could potentially be very lengthy. We've received detailed syllabi that are 100 pages. We've received detailed syllabi that are 1,000 pages. Basically, what we're asking the school to provide is the most detailed syllabus they have for the years of matriculation that you attended, the program that you completed. In some cases, schools would provide perhaps a very limited few-sentence course catalog. In this case, once we receive the documents, we'd actually reach out to you to notify you that the school provided a very brief curriculum and give you the opportunity to go back to the school to see if there's a more detailed syllabus that they can provide. And again, we've highlighted why that's so important in this particular section of the form. In Part C, what we're asking the school to complete is a breakdown of the theory, lab, and clinical hours that you completed in certain specific areas. Now, these areas don't always correspond directly to a course that you took. Oftentimes, the school will have to indicate that certain hours were integrated across the program. But what we're asking them to do is to break down to the best of their ability the specific theory, lab, and clinical hours that you completed in the fields that we've identified. Now, in this particular domain breakdown, we're highlighting the areas requested on the psychiatric nursing form. Just keep in mind that the registered nursing form and the practical nursing form contain the same breakdown of specific hours that we're asking for. The psychiatric nursing form is different in that the subject areas that it asks for a breakdown of hours are specific to psychiatric nursing. Below the domain breakdown, we're also going to ask the school to provide us details on their physical address, as well as the address of any university to which they are affiliated. And then once again, as in the registration and the employment form, we're going to ask that they fill out Part D, which is identification of the official who is completing the form. And in our database, we have a wide cross-section of authorized officials from every nursing program in the world, including their institution stamp, the officials who are authorized to complete documentation for those institutions, their signatures, and email address, phone numbers. And what we do when we receive a form, we're going to cross-reference the official who completed the form against the officials contained in that database. And that helps us determine authenticity of the primary source document. So we've just gone over the details of some of the forms. To fulfill the document requirement, primary source institutions must submit the education form, the licensing authority submits the registration form, and the employer submits the employment form directly to NNAS. Documents can be mailed on paper or in a portable electronic device, as some syllabi get very lengthy. If they're going to be sending the documents via courier, they're going to send them directly to the street address. That's the 3600 Market Street address, as couriers do not deliver to PO boxes. If they're going to send documents by regular first class mail, they can choose to send them to the PO box address. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the English language proficiency testing. Currently, there are 3 types of examinations that are accepted by NNAS. So the CELBAN examination is one of them. It's International English Language Testing System administers that. I'm sorry. No, it does not. I'm sorry. CELBAN administers the CELBAN examination. That's a language examination that's geared towards specific to nursing. Then we also, for applicants applying in French, accept the TEF examination for French language proficiency. And then finally, the IELTS academic examination. And in these sections, we've highlighted the minimum passing scores that we require in each of the sections. This information is also listed in the applicant handbook for you to refer to. So there are certain applicants who will find that there is an eligibility for an exemption of the English language requirement for NNAS. So there's a couple different criteria that one must meet to be considered for an exemption of the language requirement. First off, if your first language is either English or French, you may not have to complete the language testing, but you must meet the additional following criteria. The main language where you live and work must be either English or French, and your nursing education program of instruction was in English or French. You can, and you must also be able to show evidence that you have safely practiced nursing within the last 2 years where services were provided and the main language used was English or French. So we wanted to put together a little tips for you to make the application process a little smoother. These are things you want to keep in mind when you're completing the process to avoid delays. We urge you to be very proactive in ensuring that the documents are sent by the required institutions to NNAS. You can imagine when anything's being sent internationally from a primary source to NNAS, it can be lengthy just based on the mail time. So what we urge you to do is be proactive with these institutions so there's not a delay in them completing the materials to send to NNAS. We also ask that you self-report all nursing licenses that you've ever held or still hold, because we must receive forms for each one of them. And again, I stressed this earlier and it's stressing it now because it's very important. The number one delayer of applicants' applications are when we get to the end of the process and we're doing a thorough analysis of your file, only to find that we believe something might be missing. And you may not have considered to include it. So we want to be very upfront about what we expect to be included in your application. You also want to ensure that all identity documents, or that you have an identity document for each of the names that are represented across the documents collected by NNAS. Again, if your name when you attended nursing school was different than it is now, you want to make sure, in addition to your current identification that matches your NNAS file name, you also want to provide a birth certificate that matches your former name. And again, if you do not have an identity document that verifies one of the variations of your name, an official legal affidavit can be sent in where you attest to all the different variations of your name across the documents that we've received. You also want to ensure that employers send documents to NNAS in an envelope with the employer logo or has the employer stamp or seal. This is something I had mentioned a few moments ago when we were looking at the employment form. Also, letters that we require explaining if you were employed as a nurse without a license. So for instance, if you were licensed in a jurisdiction, I'll use, say you were educated as a nurse in the Philippines, and at the time you went and you practiced in Saudi Arabia. Now, when you first went there, you were working as a nurse. It wasn't required that you obtain nursing registration at that time to practice because you were under a work contract perhaps. You want to make sure that that employer sends a letter that explains that you're permitted to practice in that jurisdiction without a registration based on, and they give the explanation. Oftentimes you begin employment prior to registration being issued in that jurisdiction. Again, a letter explaining that you were able to begin practice prior to registration because these are all discrepancies that we come across when evaluating the documents. So we do offer on our website some frequently asked questions, and these can be very helpful because by very definition, they're frequently asked. Can I apply to the regulatory body directly? No. In order to work as a nurse in Canada, you must first set up an account and apply through NNAS. Licensure in Canada is a 10-step process, and steps 1 through 4 are completed by NNAS. Steps 5 through 10 are completed by the regulatory body. So regardless of where you're applying, you must first apply through NNAS. Can I apply to more than one province or nursing group? Yes. So once you've set up your account and you've submitted your main application, including payment, it'll then give you the option to add either an additional nursing group or an additional province application. So if your main application is as an RN to Ontario, it'll give you the option to add an additional nursing group. You can also apply as an LPN to Ontario, or you can add another province. You can apply as an RN to Alberta or British Columbia. After I submit my online application to NNAS, can I change my original requested province or nursing group to a different province or nursing group? Yes, you may, but it's a very limited window. I believe you have 2 weeks once you've submitted your online application to say, oops, I meant to apply to this jurisdiction. This is often the case because with migration and immigration, your plans may not always be solid. You may plan on moving to Ontario only to find out that, you know what, at the last minute, you're going to be moving to Alberta. So this gives you a small window with which to make adjustments to the designated recipient of your advisory report in instances where your plans may change quickly at the last minute. So here's a rather new service that we offer. It's called portability. So what does it mean to port a report? Porting a report is essentially sharing an exact copy of your originally issued report to another jurisdiction. along with the documents that were supporting of that original advisory report. So to give you an example of this, if I apply as an RN to Ontario and my report is issued, once that report's issued, for a nominal fee, we'll allow you to port an exact copy of that RN report for Ontario to another regulatory body. So say it's issued and you decide, you know what, I think I'm going to apply in a different province. You can port an exact copy of that report. Now the report will still say Ontario on it, but it'll be transmitted to the other regulatory body along with all the supporting documents. You can only port reports between the same nursing group. So you can't port an RN report to an LPN jurisdiction. You can only port an RN report to another RN jurisdiction. So we do advise internationally educated nurses that it is possible that the original report may not be sufficient enough to meet the needs of the new regulatory body to which you're porting it to. For instance, in the event that Ontario allows you to defer language testing until after the advisory report is issued, where other jurisdictions may not. So if you port that Ontario report to another jurisdiction, and it does not contain language examination results, it may not meet that other jurisdiction's needs. The regulatory body that you're putting it to may request additional information directly from you, or may require you to purchase a new NNAS application specifically for them. So how do you select which report you'd like to port if you've had multiple reports issued in the last year? Okay, so if you have multiple reports issued in the last year, as a general guideline, NNAS suggests porting the most recently issued report and maintaining to that same nursing discipline. So, for instance, the most recently issued report is probably going to have the most up-to-date information. So if any new information came in specifically for that report, it'll be available in your most recent advisory report. You as the applicant accepts all responsibility when choosing which report to port. As the applicant, you should be aware that there is a unique assessment tool for each nursing discipline. And as I stated earlier, you can't port an RN report to an LPN regulator because they are completely different with their educational comparability tools.